Welcome back to World Studies. This is the last video of week 6 that we're doing. The reason for that is because the plan is we'll be finishing the notes today, and then you'll be taking the test this week. You may have noticed the video that I've added to YouTube as well. It was the Ronald Reagan speech at the Berlin Wall. If you want to watch it, I know it's a lengthier video, but also on page 157 in your activities book, I'm not assigning it as homework, but page 157 shows a shortened version of that speech. So while if you listen to the video, you can maybe read along with him as he's saying what he's saying on here. Also, if you're curious about the Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall line, that's taken around the 12-minute line of the video. So if that interests you at all, again, it's just a chance to see history in the making, a chance to see, opportunities abound because, we're in more modern times. We've got this technology to be able to see this recorded history. So if that interests you at all, you may do so. But we're at Roman numeral 4, the collapse of the Soviet Union. It seems the Soviet Union was doomed to fall. It had expanded too much for it to efficiently control. The Soviet Union consisted of several nationalities and ethnic groups with little in common. Few people joined the Communist Party. Soviet demise was rapid and sudden. But that's not how it looked like at the time. Letter A, Soviet aggression. In the 1960s and 70s, democracy seemed to be on the decline. Socialism seemed to be winning. Number 1, the 1970s, the Soviet Union used military force to take control of Czechoslovakia and South Vietnam. In 1968, Alexander Dubček became the leader of Czechoslovakia and began to restore rights to the people. He loosened control of the media, allowed free speech, and began to privatize the economy. You can see on the map here, Czechoslovakia is located right here, so just on the other side of the Iron Curtain. The Soviets disliked the changes, but when Dubček refused to listen, the Soviets sent in a military force to crush Czech resistance. They also supported North Vietnam during the war against the U.S. and South Vietnam, which we've already talked about. After the U.S. pulled out of Vietnam, communism gained an immense victory and humiliated the U.S. After this, communism spread throughout Africa and Latin America. Number 2, the 1980s. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan but failed to gain total victory. This is a modern-day map of Central Asia, and all of these countries that you see, here's Russia up here, but Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, all of these had become a part of the Soviet Union. So the next logical step, Afghanistan. But they failed to gain total victory in it. They came in promising to stabilize the country. They simply sought to take it over. Afghan freedom fighters resisted Soviet invasion with U.S. financial and military aid. Although hundreds of thousands of Afghans died, the Soviet Union failed to gain total victory. Facing growing losses with no prospect of victory, Soviet forces withdrew in 1989. Basically, think of Afghanistan as Russia's version of our Vietnam. Our Vietnam seemed to go on forever with no victory in sight. Well, Afghanistan was their Vietnam. Letter B, strong leadership in the West. Finally, some leaders in the free world are going to rise up and take a stand in opposition to communism. One of these leaders was a woman by the name of Margaret Thatcher. She became the Prime Minister of Britain and returned many nationalized industries to the private sector. Industries that had been under government control for decades returned to the private sector. She also reversed many socialist programs and forged a strong anti-communist alliance with the U.S. She would be prime minister for 11 years, and during most of that time worked closely with the U.S. president in fighting against communism. Well, who's the U.S. president at the time? Ronald Reagan. He became president of the U.S. and helped make America an influential nation again. He rejected the commonly accepted concession that the free world must peacefully coexist with communism. By making alliances with Thatcher and others, he sought to increase the free world's influence around the world. Ronald Reagan promoted a policy of peace through strength by building up America's military might and also planning for a space-based defensive system, which was called the Strategic Defense Initiative. Critics called it Star Wars after the popular movies of the 80s. But programs like these convinced the Soviet Union that they could not compete with America. Also, during this time, Ronald Reagan, it's in 1987 where Ronald Reagan gave his famous tear down this wall speech in Berlin. So you get the reference time period in which this took place. Another individual by the name of Lech Walesa, led the solitary movement in Poland in opposition to communist rule. For the first time, we see an individual standing up to the Soviet Union and, getting away with it. Walesa was an electrical technician. He combined labor, the Catholic Church, and Polish nationalism to oppose Soviet domination. By 1989, Poland will achieve independence. Letter C. The fall of the Soviet Union and division along national lines. The Soviet Empire lasted over 70 years, yet this artificial empire was dependent on U.S. grain shipments and stealing U.S. technology. Communism is not self-sustaining and will not finish out the 20th century. Number one, the collapse of the Soviet system. After Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev led the Soviet Union until his policies became unpopular and he was voted out of office. We can already see change was evident. In fact, Khrushchev himself said that if efforts had been made to remove Stalin, they would have been shot. But Khrushchev willingly resigned, quote unquote, and left power. After Khrushchev, several aging Russian Soviets led. The last leader was a man by the name of Mikhail Gorbachev. You see in the foreground, Reagan standing behind him. He was comparatively younger than his predecessors. Gorbachev recognized the weaknesses found in the Soviet system and sought to fix the problems present. He assumed power without violence or opposition. Gorbachev sought to restructure the political and economic system by calling for elections, releasing political prisoners, and allowing private ownership of business. For decades, the Soviet government had emphasized building a strong military. During these years, the people had endured rationing of food, clothing, and other material goods. Gorbachev began de-emphasizing the military and favoring reform. In 1990, the people elected him as the first president of the Soviet Union. Eventually, though, all of that unraveled. Communist leaders lost control, and the people demanded more freedom. The fact of the matter is, the problem with freedom is that people always want more of it. You get a little taste, you want the whole pie. Number two, division into many states. In 1991, the Soviet Union quickly divided into 15 independent countries. If you look at page 364, it shows you a map of the countries that were formed from the Soviet Union. Romania violently overthrew Soviet control. Other nations, including Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, and Poland, declared their independence. By Christmas, the Soviet Union was dead. Letter D, new opportunities for Christians. For many years, the Soviets had denied many rights, including freedom of religion, for millions of people. Now, without the Soviet Union, things had changed. Freedom to worship. Under communism, Christianity was discouraged, prohibited, or even persecuted. After communism, people gained and exercised their new freedom of religion. Other believers had to meet in barns, forests, or fields in order to hold a church service. Yet despite the discomfort and danger associated with public worship, Christians continued to meet whenever possible to worship and to encourage one another. Eastern Europeans thronged to churches and no longer had to fear arrest or harassment. Case in point, the first time they had the opportunity to celebrate was that Christmas of 1991, and they celebrated after 70 years of not being allowed to. Number 2, the freedom to evangelize. Even under communism, when they could be imprisoned, many Christians had continued to do so. After communism, many Christians in Eastern Europe could spread the good news of the gospel without government interference. And missionary outreach. Missionaries from the U.S. and other places could now bring the gospel to these lands. The opportunity for the Great Commission to continue spreading to the other half of the world. That, my students, is the end of the notes. For your homework, I need you to do page 159 in your activities books. Page 159 is the chapter review, so there'll be a few of the underlining, the word or phrase that correctly completes the statement, and then a short matching section at the bottom of the page. This will be turned in with your week 6 packet. Also, please make sure that you take the chapter 19 test. Once you have all that done, that's all you need to worry about for history class this week. Hope you all have a good day. Hope you all enjoy your weekend. Be good, do good. Bye.